Greetings, Trinitarians. This podcast is possible partly because of Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary in Evansville, Indiana. If you're interested in beginning your theological academic journey at Trinity, contact us at Trinitysem, that's Trinitysem.edu today.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of Trinity Radio. I am Jonathan Pritchett, and along with me is
Braxton Hunter.
And today we are going to answer some questions that we were asked on Facebook. Stick around.
So
it's not heresy. It's
it's Harrison.
Wow! They gave us nothing but tradition and no argument. All they did was get on this stage, yell real loud, and set a straw man on fire.
Okay, now I was not impressed. I've never heard of this gentleman before, but.
And there is no evidence at all, except in the imagination of Dr. Braxton and like-minded thinkers, that there is such a thing as an objective morality.
All right, well, that was a very passionate speech by Professor Alvarez. However, let me point out a couple of things that I have not argued tonight that Professor Alvarez seems to think that I have argued.
Everything that begins to exist must have a cause for its existence.
On behalf of humanity, God became man to die for the sin of the world. Then, because of that sacrifice, you can rise from the dead just like he rose from the dead.
During the walk that Jesus was on in the New Testament, it said that Jesus talks with God the Father, and many times was also witnessed by the disciples and John the Baptist. Please explain so we can understand more clearly how this communication took place, a voice from human earthliness being and the divine, and whether in the case of Jesus' baptism it was the Holy Spirit, also God as one of the Trinity, or since his hypostatic union was a miracle from God, also had the capability of communicating between the two.
Are you guys having trouble? I can answer.
I want him to talk.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I don't know. I mean, look, folks.
Well, I could have said that.
I mean, honestly.
Okay, as you can see, fresh back from...
I don't know, right?
Yeah, fresh back from Florida, where we wrestled alligators and church people. Yeah. But it was fantastic, and what it got us thinking was, we need to do Q&A stuff. Now, I can't say this is the first ever Q&A episode of Trinity Radio because, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, something like that. I think they're the first two in the iTunes or like in the podcast feed.
Oh, okay.
If you go all the way back, there was 2 episodes. I don't even know if I agree with what I said back then. Probably so. But I haven't listened to it in a while. But we're going to do this. And actually, we're doing this for a good reason. We're setting up Dr. Pritchett for a new either segment or mini episode type thing that is going to be with a different set behind us, and we're going to be answering questions in shorter videos.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this and you thought, well, I don't want to submit, but I wish I had more time, submit whenever you want. Just submit it on the Facebook or private message me on Facebook or something, and we will put your question in the till so that you can get your questions answered. And I haven't even told you this, Dr. Pritchett, but for a lot of people out there, whenever I talk at conferences about apologetics, I always tell people, you can be an evangelistic apologist today, even if you've never heard of apologetics before. And the way you can do that is you may not be able to be an answer giver yet, but you can be an answer finder for people because you can say to them, hey, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm going to go find out for you. And so what I think we ought to call this new segment is something like Answer Finders.
Or I don't know.
Or I don't know. The I don't know. Of course, that we do know most of the time, but we hope. Depends on your questions. But all right, so talk some more.
Yeah. Well, I did like some of the questions that we got on Facebook. We asked around. We were hoping that we would get less theology geek questions and more layperson questions, but it seems like lay people don't have as many questions as theology geeks have. So that was a little bit. So if you're not a theology nerd like Anthony Giles is a theology nerd, I love Anthony Giles. He's awesome. Ask us a question. That was one of the things I really enjoyed about Florida was listening to you guys give answers to just random questions, and then I would just kind of chime in, and then y'all would make me answer certain questions, and that was nice too.
Okay, now I don't have necessarily.
But you know what? I want to say one more thing.
Okay.
Props to Steve Gregg, who does that every day, because it's not always,
Yes. Just taking whatever comes across the thing. And I will tell you, because I've done a lot of these where I'm the only one.
Yeah.
And you would do as good or better at this than me. But when you're the only one, where you get a weird question, you're like, man, I really wish somebody else was here to answer that question. Since you know that's not going to happen,
Right.
you just get into it. And sometimes you surprise yourself. You're like, that's pretty good,
Yeah.
Okay, we want to say right at the beginning, we thank our patrons.
Absolutely.
We
got
have
some new ones.
New patrons.
Yes, love our patrons.
Let's give all our patrons. We have Robert Gillier, William Schroeder, Armin Jacob Paulson, Johnny Miller Jr., Kurt Jaros.
Stop. Go to Veracity Hill and watch his interview. It's his 100th
N.T. Wright.
episode with N.T. Wright. It is phenomenal.
Ernest George Strauss III, Austin Eakin, Paul Wayne Sims, Jonah Krylo, Austin Long, Billy Wendelin, Eleanor Meadows, Second Yang, Brian Roden, Scott McCauley, Anonymous, and then recently we have Brian Roden. Did I say that? Yeah, I already did. Scott McCauley. Did I say that? Yeah, I did. Okay, Benjamin Fogler, I think, is a new one.
Yeah.
Austin, we got Austin. Boydria Gonzalez. Sorry if I got that wrong, Boydria. Brian McNulty and Annette Tyler Burns.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Which is a cool name. Okay.
Cool lady.
So we'll put those up on the screen, and if I missed you, please forgive me. Please let me know. I'll fix it. We're actually getting enough patrons now, but we're still not to our goal.
Right.
And not by a long shot. So
we promise to be better and more polished when we get to our goal.
we
How about
promise
that?
to be more better the more you
Right.
better us by
Right.
patronizing us. Okay. Okay, so let's get right into this, Dr. Pritchett.
Yay.
So here's some interesting questions. That's my computer, don't freak out. I always do that. That should be just my tagline. That's my computer, don't freak out. Okay, by the way, if you'd like to give to our Patreon thing, you can click somewhere up here, or you can, if you're listening and not watching, you can go to patreon.com/Trinity Radio. Also, come on, guys. We are at over 600 now YouTube subscribers. That is really important to us. You may not know why, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to know why. Just know that if you appreciate this show and you don't feel compelled to give us money, that is perfectly fine. But what you can do that doesn't cost you anything, even if you don't watch the YouTube channel, is just go subscribe to it, man.
Yeah. Like, share,
because they
subscribe,
unlock more capabilities on the Trinity Radio Death Star the closer we get to 1,000 and then beyond. So just come on.
Yeah.
We really do appreciate every single one.
Yeah. Like our videos, share our videos, subscribe to our channel, all that good stuff.
Sign up for courses at Trinity College
the
of Bible
main
and Theological
thing.
Seminary,
That's the main
Trinitysem.edu. That's really why we do this, is to inform you and to let you know about the greatest Bible college and seminary on the face of the planet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Anthony says, when someone is seeking to understand Christianity and are, for lack of better words, deciding between Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and our faith, how do you guide them through that, especially if you don't get an exhausted or an extended period of time with them? First of all, direct them to Trinity Radio. That is something you can do in a moment.
That's right.
Say youtube.com/Braxton.
We have talked about Mormons. We haven't talked about the Jehovah's Witnesses.
We will,
yet.
though. We will talk about it. And I had someone after the Q&A in Florida said, I'm a converted I'm a Christian now. I was a Jehovah's Witness. And what do you think about this and that and the other thing? I said, well, I've got a course on it, but we need to do an episode on it. And we will.
I mean, they had Prince.
Yeah, they had Prince.
Yeah.
They also had one of the ladies on The View.
Oh, okay.
We know that they're top shelf thinkers. I
like Prince's music, though.
Well, sure,
He
who
was
doesn't?
good.
Yeah. But, okay. First of all, I think that if you don't, here's a simple apologetic strategy that I always think our listeners should use. Not that you have to take my opinion, but if you turn up here, it means that you care a little bit what we have to say. And I bet you Dr. Pritchett would agree with me that if you don't have much time, and you have to choose wisely with the time you have, give them the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Give them the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right.
It is the power of God unto salvation.
Yeah.
And you may not be able to get to the intellectual side of things, but I'm presuppositionalist enough, Dr. Pritchett, that I can say just presume that the gospel is true and give it to them.
Yeah. And then if they're curious about why your brand of Christianity and not Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness, if you give them the gospel, it's easier from there to explain why Mormonism, for example, is different because it's works-based, or Jehovah's Witness is different because, well, where do you begin? Failed prophecies, weird beliefs, wrong Jesus because they don't believe that he's the second person of the Trinity. Just all kinds of things that easily jump off from just the gospel to differentiate why historic Orthodox Christianity is true and why these, sorry guys, but Mormonism's weird and dumb.
Yeah.
And so is Jehovah's Witness. I'm sorry, I know it sounds...
There's a difference between weird and true and weird and dumb. Because you just said the other day in Florida, Christianity is sometimes weird and that's fine.
Yeah, but I said weird and dumb.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're Kolob. That's okay. We're back to that. No, just...
You can be your own father of your own planet.
Right. Infinite regress of gods, and you can be a little god one day, and there's more gods than any other religion in existence because of infinite regress of them.
Yeah, the thing that you've asked here, Anthony, that makes it a little difficult to answer is, well, if you don't have an extended period of time. So my answer there is give them the gospel.
Yeah.
If they stick around and ask you further questions, answer those questions as long as they're willing to listen. And if you have other things going on that you don't have enough time to spend with them, that sometimes is true. Your wife may be having a baby or something like that, or you might be about to experience a hurricane and can't continue the conversation. But I think people's souls are very important. So if they don't want to stick around, that's one thing. But I think we should make every effort to stick around and answer their questions as long as we can, because we do think that souls are in jeopardy.
Yes, we do. And it's important to... There was a debate here recently, okay, I am calling Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses dumb. I'm not calling the people dumb, I'm calling the religion dumb, right?
Yeah.
And there was a big debate. Is that kind of thing okay? So David Wood's doing this Islamicized.
Oh, I'm glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah. And
did you listen to their response?
Yeah, I thought it was phenomenal. Of course,
okay, go ahead and explain what it is.
So, okay, Islamicized Me is kind of like that Supersize Me documentary with the guy at McDonald's every day for 30 days. They're trying to live according to the Hadith for 30 days. David Wood and some compatriots of his.
Vocab Malone and I don't know the other guy's name.
I can't think of his last name. Mick something.
John Mellencamp. Go ahead.
No, but it's a hilarious spoof mockumentary.
Yeah.
And some people, I think it was James White, threw a big fit about it.
Who?
James White.
I don't know.
Yeah, from the Dividing Line, which was great because I saw anyway. It's making fun and showing you what it would be, and some people had certain objections to that. I don't agree with any of the objections, which is why you hear me obviously call things like.
Oh, I thought they nailed it.
Yeah.
One of the things that did you say you did listen to their response? Mm-hmm. One of the things I thought was great was. Now, I didn't hear what James White said, but they said that what James White, and they were being really cautious to try and get it right. Yeah. If he didn't say this, fine. But what they said, James White said was, don't talk about all the evils within Islam, within the Quran and stuff, because they do that same thing to the Old Testament. And they're like, wait a minute, whoa. You don't think there are good answers to the Old Testament criticisms? Of course you can knock this down, but I think what you're getting at is the important thing about what they did was they were saying, no, look, this is an extremely dangerous, not only religious but also political, which the same is true of Mormonism, that it's political. I don't know that it's dangerous in the sense that Islam is dangerous, but it's dangerous and it's okay to shoot it down. And not every single time do you get the chance to give the gospel. It's okay to shoot it down and be forceful and even be satirical because it is dangerous.
You call it for what it is. That's why I call Mormonism for what it is.
And it's outpaced. It's going to outpace.
The only thing I disagreed with their response was he said nice things about James White knowing more about the Bible, but he said that James White was not very good on Islam.
I disagree with them about not giving the gospel. How hard is it? I mean, I don't think that what they did was wrong, the things that he was criticizing, but I do think you can always give the gospel.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Then it becomes like this tacked-on thing at the end, like Joel Osteen at the end of his message. Well,
I'm glad Joel Osteen does that.
Yeah, okay, but I see what there's plenty of other things where he talks about the gospel on that YouTube channel. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds pious, but do you have to just every video that you
We don't, but you know what? We should.
Yeah.
Jesus died and rose again for the sin of the world so that you can die and rise. We do. It's in the intro. It's in the intro. We give the gospel and everything tacked on just at the beginning instead of the end.
Yeah, but I do want to say that for the most part, I agreed, except for the fact that he said that James White knows a lot about the Bible, and I don't think he really actually understands much about the Bible. And since David Wood gave me permission to not listen to James White on Islam, because he says James White's not good on Islam, and if you take away...
Oh, is that what he says?
Yeah.
Okay.
If he says he's not a reliable guy on Islam issues, and then I already don't think he's reliable on theology, we have no reason to pay attention to James White anymore.
I think
that's good news. Thanks, David. I don't have to listen to James White.
I think James White is probably really good on Islam, but I think David Wood's probably better. David Wood is awesome.
Yeah, but David Wood's qualified to determine whether or not...
Well, but it's like you saying that some particular theologian is not good.
Yeah, I don't.
Well,
think James
he's probably good.
James White
he's just not up to the standard that you have assigned.
I don't think that he's really that good of a theologian, and I don't think that if an expert on Islam says this guy you shouldn't really listen to him much, says don't listen to him much, it's not really good. Plus, he loses debates against Muslims.
Does he?
I think James White loses those debates. Just rhetorically, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we think about Islam. Back to Mormonism. What was your point?
I like that David Wood does that kind of thing.
Oh, you're saying making fun of it a little bit is not the end of the world because the Bible uses satire. Yeah. The Bible is very straightforward.
And no, you don't have to be Jesus or the apostles to follow, to imitate me like I imitate Christ. Well, that's going to include some of those.
Well,
things
here's
too.
the thing.
So
I
don't get the objection that you're not a prophet, so you can't talk like that, or you're not an apostle, so you can't talk like that.
Yeah, but there are examples
right.
for how to preach the Bible and preach the gospel. Here's the thing that I do think that, and this is going to sound Pritchett-like, and Pritchett never even said this, but I think that some things that we apologize for as Christians, like where we apologize for all of Christianity, which is good because whatever I've done wrong, some preacher out there has apologized for me too, so it's fine. Right. But I think that we do a little. That's good to do, and there's certain issues I think we should, like the homosexuality thing. Yeah. We should apologize for how Christianity has at times done certain Christians to that. But here's the thing. There's something to say about triumphalism. You always say that. There's something to say about not always coming off as, geez, we're awful people, and we've always been awful to you, and you're not awful. And even though what you're doing is going to lead you to hell, you're fine, but we've been awful. And so please listen to our gospel that we awful people have been trying to give you. No, it's okay to say we're all sinners, you're a sinner, we're sinners. The difference is we're saved. We want you to be saved. Right. And it's like one of the questions that we got on the night of the Q&A was, one of the first questions came to me was, you guys are arrogant because you think that Jesus is the only way. And I think this is the right answer. I mean, I know you said this, and this is what every apologist says, and I think it's right, that it's not arrogant to say 2 + 2 = 4, right? At the same time, the most humble thing you can say is to say, I don't have your answers. You don't have the answers. I can't help you. I don't have the answers. But you know what? He does. Jesus has the answers. Yeah. It's the most humble thing to say, I'm broken. I can't help you at all, but he can.
And when it comes to, from what I took from Anthony's question, if you're talking to somebody who's either considering or you're just witnessing to them, if it's between Orthodox Christianity and Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism and you don't have a lot of time, like going back to what we said with the gospel, but there's so much that, and I know our presuppositional friends are going to get angry about this, but there's so much that you can probably find objectively in common with the average person. Do you believe that the universe has an infinite past, or do you believe in the Big Bang?
Yeah, but see, right there, I think you're right, and of course we talked about
Christianity affirms creation ex nihilo. You already kind of think that's true,
But he said if you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, I would point out.
Here's my thing.
I would point out the confirmations of orthodoxy and reality versus Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses and their struggle to align with reality.
I think you're right. Those things. As far as Mormonism goes, we have an episode on that. We'll have one on Jehovah's Witnesses too, but he hit some of the main issues there with Jehovah's Witness theology. But here's the bottom line. If you don't have a lot of time, give them the gospel and maybe your phone number or email or a resource like this. But if you can, make time for it because it's that important. Yeah. Okay, next question. We got that pretty quick. What is the most important theological debate to reconcile for Christians and why? And he gives some examples. Soteriology, gifts for today, baptism, Eucharist. Now, if you don't know what we're talking about, soteriology is like issues of salvation, views on how salvation works. So Calvinism versus Arminianism versus whatever. Gifts for today, that's charismatic like questions. How do we understand the gifts? Are the gifts for today? Baptism, Eucharist. So I think they're all important.
Yeah, they're all important. But what's the most important?
Is soteriology more important than the gifts for today?
No.
I think so, frankly.
I think not.
The understanding of how salvation works?
Yeah, this Calvinism,
No, because he may be thinking of that, but soteriology is bigger than the oblique, or the little Calvinism
Yeah, but you could just say the gospel.
If you get salvation
I think you have
wrong,
to make a distinction between the gospel message that saves and how the mechanics of it. And I think soteriology is more of a theology of the mechanics of salvation.
well, if that's what he means, it doesn't have to mean that.
If he's using the word, that's what he means.
You think he's talking about the Calvinism debate?
Well, or the theology of how salvation is enacted in the life.
Okay.
If he's using the word soteriology, then obviously he's making that claim. I don't think that's as important as the gifts of the Spirit. No. I think
you don't think it's as important? So you think the gifts of the Spirit question is more important?
Yes, because it impacts most people in the church. Everyone has the Holy Spirit, and how much in the life of the Spirit you have affects every believer, whether they're interested in the Calvinism or Arminianism or traditionalism or Molinism, whether they're interested in those stuff or not. They all have the Holy Spirit. That affects all of them, and getting that right, I think, would be important.
Yeah, well, I think if you're trying to say, and I can hear everybody agreeing with you because it's all that's the flavor of the group. But if you not agreeing with you, but
I don't think
everybody wants to do nothing but talk about soteriology, and then everyone wants to act like it's not important. Oh, come off it.
No,
if it's not important, then don't. If it's not as important,
that issue I've not debated. I'm saying,
yeah, but you don't talk about the spiritual gifts nearly as much as you talk about soteriology.
No, but I do think it's probably more important of a thing to get right, because let's say cessationism is true, then quit faking gifts that don't exist anymore. Okay, if continuationism is true, which is I believe it, quit closing yourself off to the things of the Spirit that the Spirit has for you.
Yeah, I agree.
That because that affects everybody.
Yeah, okay, but here's the thing. If you really believe that, then I expect to find you now talking about the gifts of the Spirit at least more than soteriology.
But the gifts of the Spirit, that's not my, wheelhouse. I don't mind talking about it. If you want to talk, let's do a whole show on it. Why I'm a charismatic.
Well, I am too by your definition of charismatic, which means not a cessationist. I'm a continuationist.
I don't have any. Have
you ever healed anybody?
No, this was.
You ever spoken in tongues?
No. Have I ever?
You ever prophesied?
Well, I've made predictions.
That's not a prophecy. Let's hope, because we'll have to kill you soon.
That's what I said in the Q&A in Florida when I was asked this.
But here's the thing. Have you still had a fulfilling Christian life?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, if we're going to say that how salvation works versus whether or not these gifts or whatever, but just the theological thing, I don't see saying that one's more important than the other. And if it is, I get what you're saying. One has more practical implications. But I don't know that I agree with that. I think the soteriology
has... Yeah, because it affects our evangelism and all that. Yeah. But if I said what is more important getting right, I think we academic types focus too much on the abstract and not enough on the nuts and bolts. And that the fact that I talk about Calvinism more than charismatic gifts probably demonstrates a problem with me, because the gifts of the Spirit touches.
Let me quote Leighton Flowers. Your soteriology drives your evangelism and apologetics.
Yeah, we agree.
And
with
I
that.
agree.
Yeah.
And since I think evangelism itself, in general, is extremely important.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm pushing you around with this. I just felt like you took a position that I don't know. I thought it needed some balance.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, mine is more. I have to constantly remind myself that people actually read pastoral ministry books that don't have footnotes. Okay, and that is probably a good idea that I might read one. I have to remind myself.
Well, no, the good ones still have footnotes. Don't do that.
I have to remind myself that people are actually interested in that kind of thing. People still. There's a daily Christian walk for others that for most people that's different than for people like you and I.
Yeah.
And we can get distracted from what their life is like. And I think they all have the Holy Spirit, and they all have a gift of the Spirit. The Holy Spirit gives one or more to everybody.
Yeah, let's back up and
So-
say the simple solution is all these things are important.
Yeah.
But if you're asking us to rank them, we disagree about that. Now, baptism, you put baptism here. Let me tell you something, and this is true of the Eucharist too. If baptism is necessary for salvation, which I personally don't hold, I hold that you will follow in baptism, and I assume you agree with me on this.
Yeah.
You'll follow in baptism is the first thing Jesus asks you to do after you become a Christian, as a symbol. And symbols and ceremony, I'm sorry, people that want to ditch stuff that seems a little too institutionalized or a little too religious or whatever, but symbols seem to matter to God. But if baptism is necessary for salvation, which I don't think it is, and you don't think it is, then that instantly becomes the most important issue on this list.
Well, okay.
Except for maybe the Eucharist, about which you could say the same thing.
No, okay, it's like this. With baptism, most people that are believers don't refuse it. So let's say baptism is necessary for salvation, over all things being equal. Okay, most people are fine then, because most people probably got baptized.
Well, it depends, because for some of these people, your understanding and attitude about the baptism impacts whether it happened or not. Just like with some traditionalists, your understanding about the sinner's prayer impacts whether it was real or not when you began your journey.
Yeah. I think baptism would have been more important when people were being drowned for holding to Christ's baptism.
Well, yeah. I mean,
See, that's what I'm saying. Some of these issues rise more to what's more relevant or immediate now for the church than others. I would say baptism after the post-Reformation era, where they were drowning people for being credo Baptists, that was an important issue to work out.
life and death, but in terms of eternity, it's still as relevant today as it was then, if baptism is necessary for salvation.
Right.
Which I don't think it is.
I don't either.
And since I don't think it is, I put it, I mean, it's like the rest of these things. I think they're all important, but not...
But do you see my point, though, that most people get baptized after they're saved? So let's say you and I are wrong, they're still fine because they got baptized.
If having done that, and some semblance of sincerity about wanting to do what God wants you to do is what matters there, then a baptismal regeneration advocate would be fine, I guess, with this. But I'm just saying, it becomes, to my mind...
The Eucharist is different. I don't know that that's like something that's... There's always something, to use my word, weird and mysterious about that anyway, no matter what position you take.
And symbolism again.
Right.
Maybe, or maybe not.
Do we need to have that? Is that the
maybe it's not
is
just
that
symbolism.
the issue we need to? Is that the most pressing issue for our cultural context in our evangelical subcultural context to work out right now? Probably not. I would say the gifts or soteriology would be the two pressing ones, because the one of the gifts
among evangelicals.
Yeah, the one with the gifts, it impacts every single person on the planet or in the church. With soteriology, like you said, it impacts your evangelism, I think that's correct. And the fact that people are always talking about it and using that as the doctrine by which they align on a whole bunch of... Look at the SBC right now. There's a whole host of people fighting about a whole host of things, but you know what? You can generally tell what side they're on. If they're a Calvinist, they affirm Calvinism, and then a whole bunch of other stuff, and that they're fighting about. And generally speaking, if you're a traditionalist or a closet Arminian somewhere hiding in the SBC, generally, I'm not speaking everybody, but generally speaking, you also affirm a whole host of other beefs that you have in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so all of these other beefs that they have are divided. And I take Adrian Rogers, the late great Adrian Rogers is right, that the SBC is a bellwether for evangelicalism in America in general. Right. And so typically all of the conflicts you have you can put them on one side of that side or the other. So that might have a... I don't know that that's right, that all this stuff should get tied to a soteriology.
You know, I think of all the members of the Trinity Commission, you talk about the Southern Baptist world more than any of us.
Yeah, because I agree with Adrian Rogers, and if you're a Southern Baptist, you should agree with Adrian Rogers. General Baptists are nowhere near as big as the SBC.
No, I'm just saying because you tend to, you always say about me and Flowers and everybody, or especially me and Flowers. I guess only me and Flowers. You're like, yeah, you guys just think in terms of the SBC and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, who talks about this more than anybody else?
I didn't say y'all only think in terms of the SBC. I said that y'all think of theology in that way, but not all of you. I'm the one who sees a lot of evangelicalism represented in the SBC because it's such a big tent.
Yeah.
Now, not all of it, because naturally most of them are cessationists as opposed to continuationists, though that's changing. They're all complementarians. They're all, except for Wade Burleson and a handful of others, but they're mostly all a complementarian denomination, a credo Baptist denomination. But that's about the only, and a once saved, always saved denomination. But that's the only, but other than that, every other.
I'm going to have to cut a lot of this out because we're way off from this topic.
Well, we're trying to figure out what is the most important thing. And that's not a simple question.
I honestly think these are all, the four that you've mentioned here are important.
Okay, why is the Lord's Supper important to you on the same level as
I say the same thing about baptism.
Yeah.
And I'll say it about this. If that is a means of grace to maintain my salvation or something, okay, well then that's pretty darn important that I understand that. Since I don't think so, it's a matter of obedience like baptism.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you mean. I believe it's a means of grace, but of course I always have to.
What we're talking about is if it keeps you saved.
Yeah,
if it's one of the things necessary to keep you saved, then it's very important.
I don't think that's the only issue that people think about when they think about the Lord's Supper, though.
Well, yeah.
And that's not the only way people
that's
think
not
of
what
it
I'm
as
saying.
a means of grace.
I'm saying that's what makes it as up with baptism as the most important thing, if that is what we're saying. But since neither of us here are saying that,
right.
It's important.
It is important.
It's not. It's not more important.
Do you think that once a quarter is good to take it? And then Easter, Christmas, or weekly, or once a month?
I couldn't.
You've been a pastor. What did you do?
Yeah, well, I did the Southern Baptist thing, which is whenever you feel like it. Whenever everybody gets together for a deacons meeting, where you pay the pulpit tax, and you're like with a deacons meeting, and then you're like, hey, we probably should do the Lord's Supper, right? But if I did it again, I think I'd do it more frequently. The Baptist position, of course, often is, well, you don't want to do it so often that it loses its meaning and just becomes a pointless ritual. On the other hand, we had some people that were Church of Christ get saved, and not that Church of Christ people are not necessarily saved, but we did have some that got saved, came to our church, and they didn't like that it was not often, and it really bothered them. And it, as often as you come together, do this in remembrance of me. Okay, I get that. If somebody does that, I understand they're trying to be faithful to the Bible. I also don't think the Bible's legalistic on things like this. So I think, well, you gave me a look.
I was just thinking in Corinth they were getting drunk.
Yeah, they were doing as often as they could,
right?
Because someone was bringing the good stuff.
Their faces and not sharing with others, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's a lot of different ways. I think of it as a means of grace, just not in the same way that a Catholic would. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Where I slide more with the Reform camp.
But is it more important than
no
soteriology or
right
gifts
now,
of the today? No.
I think those two, the ones we picked, are probably need to go head to head. But all right, let's go to the next. Sorry, we couldn't answer more definitively.
Sorry we are taking so long with all our answers, but it is what it is.
It's what we do.
And I'm feeling a little feisty today. Does it feel that way?
Well, if I say something, you're going to take the opposite.
That is usually the reverse. That is not how it typically is.
No, people have been talking about Braxton Prime lately. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, well, don't do that.
People
give me my own thing.
People miss the old.
Can somebody give me my own thing?
Yeah, you have several things, pseudo-Braxtonius and all of that, but
it's just.
But people are saying, but what they're saying is, Braxton has gotten honorary.
Yeah, but I repent of it every time. That's the difference. You're like the sinner that just goes on in sin and never repents.
Why is it a sin? Wait a minute.
I know. I said you're like. It's a simile. You're like the sinner that just goes on in sin without ever repenting. And I'm at least the guy who feels bad and repents every night. Okay. Be merciful to me, a sinner. And you're over here. Thank God, Lord, you didn't make me like those other people.
Yeah. That's
man. Could this maybe turn into the best episode ever? All right. Michael says, how did the serpent talk to Eve?
This is how does the intercommunication dialogue between the Trinity work? It's kind of, I don't know. I like there was a serpent there, and then there was a voice that could be heard, but not necessarily a.
Well, yeah, Hank Hanegraaff. You know Hank Hanegraaff.
Yeah.
He says that this is clearly just a symbolic story, and I'm not gonna get all uppity about that right now, but I think this is a real story that really happened. Where do you land on that?
Yeah.
Or are you
ish.
Okay, I think it's a real story. If you're and the reason he says it has to be symbolic is because serpents do not have the vocal requirements for speech.
Yeah, neither do donkeys. But
yeah, exactly. Why could not Satan have made this serpent speak?
This is a problem with scientific concordanism again. Get rid of it. Quit trying to say because there is no scientific.
You go over to like Answers in Genesis, and they're all like, "Well, for all we know, all the animals spoke." It was like a Disney cartoon, And I'm like, well, okay, maybe, but I don't have any reason to believe that their vocal.
Please tell me that's not there.
Well, not like a Disney cartoon, but that's what it sounds like. They're like, for all we know, lots of the animals spoke. That's really their answer. But it's part of their answer. But here's the thing. I think when the fall did not make it such that I used to have 3 arms and now I've only got 2 arms because of the fall. No, I think people always had 2 arms. Adam's arms were probably better arms than my arms. Of course, my daughter's arms are probably better arms than my arms. But the thing about it, the thing about it is, I think that the vocal, whatever's in a snake's throat section. Do snakes have throats? They have a throat quadrant or something.
Yeah.
But whatever that is, I think what's there is what was there probably.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think that they part of it. But here's what I am telling you. I don't think they used to have a vocal organ that then fell off. I just think that Satan possessed this animal and
communicated through the snake.
And Revelation does seem to give strong implication that the serpent was Satan. He's that old serpent called the devil, deceived the whole world. Well,
From
who's
the
that
beginning,
right? Yeah. So Paul doesn't quite say it in 2 Corinthians 11, but he comes pretty darn close. He equates it. So, but I think now, do we have examples of demons inhabiting animals? Sure, we do. What about the pigs when Jesus cast the demons? They didn't speak. But then, of course, we do have animals speaking without the vocal requirements necessary in Balaam's donkey, like you.
It's a miracle. And it's weird, and it's supernatural, and creepy. So let it be that, When I envision it, I envision there being a serpent present, and I envision an audible voice. I don't necessarily, the mouth.
It's worth mentioning, and I think our crowd can handle this.
Yeah.
There are some cases of demon possession that we know about where there are multiple voices coming out of one person.
Right.
And some of them are not human voices. Is that real? I don't know for sure, but I don't really have any good reason to doubt it.
Yeah.
There's pretty good evidence for that sort of thing. So
it's completely possible that something like that occurs in the world. Yeah, that's all we're saying.
So, but now here's another question people want to know. Why didn't it shock her? It seems not to have shocked her when the serpent spoke. Well, first of all, one of my favorite things in the world is Balaam's donkey, where he's beat the donkey now twice. And he goes to beat the donkey the 3rd time for running him into a wall because the donkey sees an angel. He doesn't see the angel. And then the donkey, when he's about to beat him, turns around, and this is the Braxton International version. It's paraphrased. But the donkey turns around and says, "Have I not always just been a good donkey? Why are you doing this?" and he says, "You have always been a good donkey." So it's like he doesn't miss a beat.
Right.
And that was at a time when everyone knew that animals didn't talk like that.
Yeah.
But God did that.
Weird things happen.
Balaam.
Yeah. Weird things happen.
First of all, let me tell you, in the story of Balaam and the donkey, and in the story of Eve and the serpent, it's not recorded that she didn't freak out or be surprised about it. But who's to say that doesn't mean that she wasn't? I mean, she could have well been. Whoa, what's going on here?
Or not. She may not have existed for very long when that happened. We don't.
That's true too.
I mean, we don't know. She doesn't have enough experience to know whether or not that's weird. We don't know. And and
consider this. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but Adam and Eve must have been born or created with some prerequisite knowledge, because immediately they're speaking to God. Mm-hmm. So God must have uploaded certain information about the world into them from the jump. So maybe one of the things was you might have an animal speak to you one day trying to deceive you. I don't know, which would make the fall even worse than she would have known. But she did know. But you know what I mean? You tracking with me?
I'm tracking.
Do I need to slow down?
No, I'm just saying,
kidding.
I'm saying, well, this is one of those things that there's no right answer because it's impossible to know.
Yeah, but it's fun.
But I'm not going to be the liberal guy who says, well, nothing like this happened. And like I said, do I believe it's ish? But I'm not there's nothing that happened in the garden. And I'm not the guy that says, well, it doesn't matter if a serpent talked. It only matters what the serpent said. No, it matters to some people. That's why we get questions like this.
Yeah, it's hard for some. I don't think this person is having a faith crisis, but there are people who have a faith crisis over stuff like this. Yeah. But here's the bottom line. The Bible has a lot of supernatural stuff in it because it's a part of the world.
Yeah, way after Genesis.
Yeah, and if you don't believe in the supernatural, things like the creation of universes and the resurrection from the dead and the healing of the blind, if you don't believe in supernatural stuff, well, then none of this stuff's going to fly.
Right.
But if you are open to the creation of the universe by God, as many scientists who are not Christians are open to, then why is a snake talking?
The more difficult question
is, the
more difficult question is, why haven't animals spoken since?
Well, there are animals that speak, but they're more mimicking sounds that they hear from a human.
Oh, I mean, you're talking about parrots, and you're talking about monkeys with being able to sign and communicate.
Or watch that old America's Funniest Videos where the dog sounds like.
But no, I'm just talking about having a conversation with a donkey like Balaam, or having a conversation like Eve. Why doesn't that happen?
Yeah. Well, because they're not as smart as we are. And they don't have, there's a gene that they need to have
why doesn't God
for speech.
Why doesn't God communicate that way? That's the now.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, what you have is Balaam's donkey. You have some demons and pigs who spoke before they actually went to the pigs and ran off the cliff.
Divine hiddenness.
Yeah. And you have, I mean, how many, we're talking about a handful, 2 occasions.
I mean, it could happen, but usually the people that tell me it has happened, and I have had people tell me it has happened, are people that I find their testimony questionable about this sort of thing.
So I'm saying the biblical precedent is 2,
maybe they're the ones,
and several hundred years of time span between those 2 occasions.
Not God's favorite way to communicate.
Yeah, it's not.
He did it once.
Right. It's like there wasn't a lot of Jesus healing amputees, but he did heal an amputee in the Garden of Gethsemane when he reattached the ear. So. I mean, some things just don't have a whole lot of occurrences, and so we shouldn't expect them to have a lot of occurrences.
But I love talking about this stuff, so keep asking questions like this. But here's the thing. It's like we said down in Florida, the Bible doesn't give us all the information we'd like to have. It doesn't satisfy all our interests. I'd like to know more about angels than I'm able to know. But the Bible never sets out to teach me about angels. What I learn about angels, I learn incidentally in stories and things like that.
But it turns out a lot of people have a lot of thoughts about angels. I mean, the literature on this, I mean, if you just go through the great books.
Well, because that is...
great books fans, just look up angel in this topic and go through the whole thing.
Well, yeah, like in John Milton's Paradise Lost, you want to know what he says about this sort of thing? Yeah. He has Satan coming down, and people are going to give me a hard time for quoting Milton, but he comes down and there's the garden, and it is like a wall of beautiful trees and stuff, and he sneaks in, and in Milton there's other angels running around in the garden talking.
Why would
and
anyone give you? They're going to think you're smart because you're reading the great books.
Okay, but Satan goes to this serpent, and he dives into this serpent supernaturally, and then speaks, and it doesn't surprise Eve because there are other supernatural figures running around that she's been speaking to. I mean, I don't think that's what happened. But I'm just saying, well, the going into the serpent I do. But I'm just saying this is not a new question. And but with angels, there's more about angels in the Bible, even though the Bible doesn't set out to teach us about angels.
And there's a lot about, you can learn about angels, or what ancient Second Temple Jews in the Second Temple period thought about angels. If you just read the Pseudepigrapha and if you want, learn about Raphael, read Tobit. It's like, it's good. One of my favorite stories from the Apocrypha. So you can go find out what other people thought about it.
Right on.
But as far as the Bible,
let's do a.
Or you can audit his course on angels and demons, which is a fantastic.
Yeah, because what a lot of people don't know is some of these hierarchy of angels and stuff is from a. It's called from a Pseudo Dionysius, which is claiming to be one of Paul's disciples, but we know it was written long after, and he's saying this is what Paul thought about angels. And anyway, it's interesting stuff. It's amazing that I had enough to fill up 8 hours of lecture material on that. Okay, let's do a couple more. we speak, this is Brian, we speak at length regarding the issues with Calvinism and Reformed theology, and rightly so. But I was wondering if there was anything in the works that would speak or teach on the traditionalist view. For those of you who don't know, rather than Calvinism or Arminianism, some Southern Baptists go by the term traditionalist, and I have for a long time gone as a traditionalist. Something like a TGC or T4G, the Gospel Coalition, or Together for the Gospel. In other words, an entity that is not just focusing on soteriology and the Calvinism debate, but
Giving positive presentations for alternatives.
yeah, and then talking about other stuff that is tangentially related to that. These are groups that do that. Is there anything like that would focus solely on this view without just mentioning Calvinism? Yes.
And no.
And I'm not going to tell you what it is.
I know what it is, and
Yet.
and I know what it is, and he says yes, and I'm going to say yes and no. I don't think that I don't think that you can any. The problem with some groups that
Are you possessed of Satan?
No. The problem with some groups that is if you watch the T4G conferences and the TGC conferences, they inevitably are going to do a comparison to alternative soteriologies. I don't think that can be avoided by any group, and I don't think it necessarily needs to be.
I'm confused by the question without mentioning Calvinism.
Do you have to just constantly critique Calvinism? No. And I think that's one of the problems that other people in the past have fallen into without just giving positive presentations of their own views without having to even mention the alternative. Like I can do that. You can do that. You can present your whole doctrine of election without ever juxtaposing it with Calvinism. I can do that too. I think those kinds of things are important. I don't think it happens enough. But I don't think that it's something that you should avoid like the plague either. I do take the sentiment, though, that's probably behind the question. Does it always have to be not this, not this? Here's what's wrong about that. Can it not just be something else entirely without it? And I wholeheartedly affirm anything that attempts to do more of that than just poo-pooing the other side.
Not to always be against something, but to be positive in favor of something.
And
there have been groups like that. The Connect 316 group within the Southern Baptist community was attempting to do that.
I don't think so.
Is still attempting to do that. There are other groups like that that are out there, but there's something that I think would be more appealing and more in line with what you're talking about.
Yeah. But I want to say
still to come.
But I would never expect any of them to be never referencing another position, because it's just helpful sometimes to do that.
Well, you can clarify your own position by contrasting it with something else.
Which is what they did in the early church.
And sometimes your affirmations only make sense if someone knows why you would be affirming that.
What is in contradistinction to. Yeah. So,
like Article 8 of the traditionalist statement on the free will of man, unless you are aware of determinism and compatibilism, which within Christianity is going to be Calvinism, you wouldn't understand why is somebody affirming free will, like this view of free will that we're talking about. Okay. Randy asks, what is the proper relationship between law and gospel? Now, I can talk about that. We
can both talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want me to lay the landscape?
Sure.
Okay. Are you okay? Have I offended you?
No.
Go ahead and lay the landscape.
No. You go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
There you go. Well, I was going to say, there's a good book out. This is one of the things I actually like about the Zondervan books, where they have a view. And they lay out 5 views, okay? Mm-hmm. One of the views is the theonomic view, theonomy, which is basically everything in the Old Testament is still binding unless it was set aside in the New Testament, which means basically just the ceremonial law. But as far as the moral and the civil codes, while it may require some exegesis to make principles comparison to the modern world, you have to, all of those still apply. Okay, that's one view. Another view, kind of the more dispensational view, is none of them apply. That was a law code for Israel and only the national Israel, and has no applicability to the church. Okay. Then you have views where, the moral law is still applicable, and whatever is reaffirmed in the new covenant is still applicable. It's not a whole new thing. It's just a ratification of some of the old, mostly in the moral precepts. So there'll be the typical argument they always fight about is bestiality, for example. Never forbidden in the New Testament, but it is explicitly condemned in the Old Testament. And they're like, yeah, but in the New Testament, just because it doesn't reiterate that law doesn't mean that it's not still binding, right? So they want to say the moral aspects of the Old Testament law are still in effect, but there's arguments against that, right? Because how do you parse those out? And so there's a couple of modified, uses of the law, like the Lutheran view, and what do you can condemn the whole world by the law and then give them the gospel, and so the law still has an effect on unbelievers. Is still enforced. That's the standard for everybody if you're not a believer. But if you are a believer, then it doesn't, pertain to you. So there's a lot of different views of this. Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, what's your view?
Probably the view that.
I mean, while you're thinking about that, I could clarify something in case someone's never heard of this before. When he's talking about the different categorizations of law, which is a part of the debate, is should you categorize? Right. But you have the ceremonial law, which is stuff related to worship in the tabernacle, stuff you should do when you've been unclean or whatever, stuff like that. Yeah. Then there is civic law, which is like what happens if you kill somebody or kill somebody's animal or whatever, or things that we would call crimes. Right. In the typical, and then you have the moral law, which is not ceremonial, not civic, just right and wrong type stuff, moral law. And what a lot of people in our world, like the evangelical world, will say is, and I disagree in a very nuanced way, is they'll say, well, the ceremonial and the civic law was what was fulfilled by Jesus on the cross. He was the perfect sacrifice. He fulfilled or brought an end, or whatever, however you want to say that. That's another point of debate in the debate. But the moral law is the one part of the law that lives on. Mm-hmm. That's why we still talk about most of the Ten Commandments, or all, depending on who you're talking to, stuff like that. It's not exactly where I am, but do you want to tell where you're at?
Well, I think that there is a moral law, that one expression of that moral law is found in the Mosaic law, but that's not the only expression of it. You can find that in the New Testament as well, and you can even find that outside of the Judeo-Christian tradition, just from common grace. So that's kind of my view, that there is a what we would call the moral law that endures, because I think that more theological than exegetical statement, but I just think the moral law flows from God's nature, just as a divine command theory. So I think it's going to find its expression in the Old Covenant, but it's also going to find its expression in the New Covenant. And the New Covenant, where did they go for guidance on their moral precepts? They always went to the Old Testament. So many echoes of like Leviticus 19, and so there's sexual purity codes, and so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not a complete. The entire Old Testament law gets chunked because we know it doesn't.
Right.
We just the issue there is can it be parsed out from the other? Or is parsing it out categorically even valid? I mean, we can intellectually make those distinctions, right?
Which is what we're doing when we do that.
Right. But can you say this part of that Mosaic code goes into the New Covenant?
See, I think there's a clean. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, as you know, and I think there's a clean answer to this that other people will maybe not like. I think, first of all, to back up what you're saying about the moral law coming from the nature of God.
Yeah.
It is true that by observing the moral teachings in the Torah, we can see that there are certain principles about who God is. One way that some thinkers, theologians, suspect you can determine which things are eternally true and part of God's nature, and therefore live on past the law being fulfilled, is by looking at things that could... Like, okay, Sunday being, or Saturday being the day for worship, the seventh day. Is there something in God's nature that says the seventh day is the day where you have to have worship? Well, that's a point of debate with Seventh-day Adventists, but we would say no.
No.
That was a thing he gave to man, as well as how the tabernacle works and all these ceremonial things, and a lot of the civic things, what satisfies that justice and all that. But it's killing somebody.
Yeah.
Did God just arbitrarily decide killing people was wrong, or
No.
does that? Yeah. So that's how they think you can find that sort of thing out, is what flows from his nature. But my answer is similar to yours. It gets, I think, at what you're trying to protect. That's good about the law. I think I'm one of those people that says I think the whole law was fulfilled by Jesus. The ceremonial,
Right.
the civic, and the moral law.
I agree with that.
So that we're not keeping it because it was part of the law.
Right.
We're not even necessarily. What's going on is the New Testament talks somewhat ambiguously about what is called the royal law or the law of Christ.
Right.
If those are the same thing, there's not a lot of detail given. And it seems to be
To
that.
me, it has the effect of trying to find new language for this.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
true.
fine. It doesn't, either way is fine. I agree with that.
But let me finish. So I think what's happening is in the New Testament, Jesus fulfills the law, but then says, okay, now do what I tell you. And if you want to know, one of the best ways to know what I tell you is it's all bound up in love. Love your father,
Right.
love the father, love your neighbor
Which
as yourself.
comes from the old.
Right. Yeah. There's very little Jesus says at all that wasn't said in the Old Testament by Yahweh
implicitly.
or about Yahweh.
Yeah. So basically, here's what I say. This what you can do with the Old Testament. Okay. Number one, even if you wanted to follow kosher and you wanted to follow the festivals and all that Jesus filled up and did away with, I look at the Book of Acts and I see them still going through purity rituals and everything else. Long after the resurrection of Jesus. So, okay, eat shellfish and ham. Don't eat it. Jesus doesn't care. Just don't think you're adding anything to your salvation by doing that. So I think it's adiaphora that way. If you want to go do church on the Sabbath, on Saturday Sabbath, fine. Paul doesn't care. Nobody cares. The point is, don't think that you add anything by going back to the Old Testament and adding anything to the gospel. But here's what else you can do. Okay, so the parapet around the roof. You can principalize from that. Make your house safe so people don't hurt themselves if they're unfamiliar with the landscape.
Yeah.
And this is something that I feel. Just from personal experience, it's like, I'm going to mind that and do that kind of thing, because I had a house in Maumelle where off of the kitchen was stairs that go just 2 steps, or maybe it was just 1 step that goes into the living room. And my grandmother had never been there before, and she was walking into the living room and didn't know of that step. And guess what? She took a tumble. And guess what else? She broke her arm. And guess what else? I felt like manure.
Yeah, that was your fault.
That was my fault because I didn't bother to principletize from the Old Testament. Not that I get up on my roof and somebody's not familiar with it might fall off or whatever, because we do a lot of work there. But the principle behind that is make your house safe to strangers or people not familiar with it. And I experienced that firsthand. So I'm like, we shouldn't just ignore the Old Testament because there's a lot of wisdom bound up in
Well, right.
this kind of thing.
And to be clear, because I can already feel people get angry about my view of law and gospel, but here's the thing about it. The more the law is completed, the law is fulfilled in Christ, but the moral law is somewhat re-given in Jesus, so that you're still doing the same. The moral stuff is all still true, but that's just because it's the mind of God. But it's just that now you're not doing it because it was in the Torah, really. You're doing it because. But here's what I don't want to say, and you're hitting on it. I disagree strongly with Andy Stanley. I don't think we should unhitch from the Old Testament. Now, let me just say, some of the stuff that people give Andy Stanley a gripe over, they need to get over it. He's saying some good apologetic type preaching that's helpful and necessary. Everybody complained about one of his sermons, and I went and listened to it, and I was like, wow, that's really great. I'm going to send that to a lost friend that I have. But this unhitched from the Old Testament is
now
garbage.
I feel people getting angry at you for having said that.
I don't care. I'll defend what I say. But
I don't have a problem one way or the other with Andy Stanley.
Yeah, I disagree with
He's
this
a pastor,
unhitched from
I
the
don't
Old
listen to
Testament
pastors.
thing, if I understand what he means. But here's the thing.
I'm kidding. I listen to
Even the civic law, the Torah is still helpful for us. If I was starting a country, a government, which I won't, but if at least at this moment, I would look to the Torah for guidance. Now, not in every case am I going to do what the Torah says, and I don't think I'm required to. But I think that you'd be foolish not to pay some attention to the Torah and how God gave laws if you were constructing, but see, I wouldn't be constructing a theocracy, and that's a big difference. So there's certain things that I wouldn't have the same.
You know what? Because people don't necessarily think this way about me, but I actually am this way. I am a charitable person, and I don't think Andy Stanley would actually disagree with what you just said. Even though he said we need to unhitch for I don't think that he would actually necessarily disagree with anything you said, because he said other things. N.T. Wright always says this, and he was saying this especially around the time he wrote Jesus.
So now you're the one saying, now, Braxton.
Yeah.
I'm the prime now.
No, I'm just saying, look, when N.T. Wright, around the time that he was writing Jesus and the Victory of God, he started saying something ever since then, for 20 some odd years now, that one of the biggest problems is if you don't say everything you believe, every time you're asked a question about everything possible, they're going to say you don't believe it, right? And that's annoying, and it's uncharitable, and it's wrong to do that. If you don't express every possible nuance of your view of something every time you're asked one question.
Yeah, that's obvious.
Yeah, but no, you would think it's obvious, but people will say, you didn't say this that time,
but that's not,
you don't believe it.
But that's not, Andy Stanley is trying to be provocative, for one thing. And number two, he means, it sounds like, what he says. We were just with a pastor who really likes Andy Stanley, and he was like, I'm usually with him.
But I've heard Andy Stanley's view of Scripture, and I don't think he's like, when he says unhitch, I don't think he's saying, don't even read it, just throw it in the trash. I think his thing was, we need to not be hung up about the Old Testament. I think that he wouldn't disagree with anything you say, and I don't watch Andy Stanley.
I'm not trying to take Andy Stanley away from you. I know he's your favorite. He's your hero.
No, Juan Jun Lee and
I know
Paul
you take
Cooper
notes for Trinity Radio listening to Andy Stanley.
No, like I said earlier in the show, I need to listen to more pastors because people, I understand, do that. So I listen to my friends. I listen to Sam Schmidt and Juan Jun Lee and Paul Cooper. And now I listen to Chip Bennett, and his sermon was awesome because he talked about patron-client reciprocity in a Sunday morning service.
That's great.
I've never heard Andy Stanley ever say anything. I don't think he knows what that means.
Well, he's probably not quite as smart as Chip.
Chip Bennett has a PhD, and Andy Stanley's...
Yeah.
But
he might not be as educated as Chip Bennett. I hate to ever say anyone's not smart. Okay, let's...
No, I'll say there's a lot of people who aren't smart. But my list of people
now you're back. Now you're back. So the moral law is reaffirmed in Christ, but not... And then the civic law would be helpful. And then the ceremonial law helps us understand the holiness of God. And the separation from other culture that are other sinful activities.
It helps us understand more about what Jesus' ministry was all about, because there's so many shadows and types and all of that stuff in that ceremonial law. What were they doing, and what was God teaching and preparing the world for? Even though they totally missed it, you can go back, and the apostles went back and saw, I don't
know if you'd agree with this.
Yeah.
The law, I don't think that the law, I think Jesus brought salvation. Mm-hmm. I don't think the law was a means of salvation.
No, never.
I think the law was a means of sanctification.
Life, surely righteousness would come.
I think the law was a guide for sanctification. You do this, you're never going to be completely successful, but you do this in order to grow more like Yahweh, what Yahweh wants from you.
Yeah, I'm the Lord your God who led you out of the land of Egypt from the bonds of slavery, over and over again. The salvation of Israel had already occurred in the Exodus, okay? Now this is how you're
through water.
Yes. And this is how you're my people. And that's what it's about. It was never intended. This salvation has always been by faith, by grace through faith.
Right. That's what Paul tells us that. The author of Hebrews tells us that. Probably Paul. That.
What did you say? Say that louder.
Probably Paul.
You think Paul wrote Hebrews?
I don't know who wrote Hebrews, but I think probably. It's
God
probably.
Knows who,
it's probably either.
God knows who wrote Hebrews.
Well, of course he does.
You said nobody.
It's probably either Paul or God. The Father does not have a physical body, so nobody. The Father.
Good save.
Paul or Luke probably wrote Hebrews. Yeah, I get all the weird X-Files, different people who might have written, but probably Paul or Luke. I'm fine either way. I think there's enough really Pauline-sounding stuff in there that I think is Paul. Why are we talking about that, though? Who do you think wrote it?
Origin said it best. Only God knows.
Origin tried to cut. Never mind.
Yeah, right. On this he said it best. Yeah. I don't know. I like David Allen's case for Luke, but I don't care who wrote Hebrews. It's still in the canon. So
then why are you giving me a hard time for having an opinion about it?
No, I think it's interesting because somebody's going to say, "Yeah, that's Catholic. Catholics think Paul wrote Hebrews."
I don't care. Catholics believe in a triune God, and so do I.
All right. No, I'm just telling you what's out there.
I know.
Like most people who still...
I'd like to believe Apollos wrote it, because I just think that would be super cool. And Ronald Nash believed that and used to argue for it vigorously. Some people think Priscilla and Aquila wrote it together. Some people think, who? Mickey Mouse. You could name anybody. I don't know. It's like just who's your favorite Bible New Testament character? That's who wrote Hebrews. Yeah, there are people who say Barnabas. Yeah. Just because they want that guy to get his piece in. Mm-hmm. Especially Barnabas, because finally he gets a say. And he agrees with Paul.
I have a DeLorean. Went back in time. I wrote Hebrews.
Dude, if you wrote Hebrews, I would expect it to be a little... Well, actually, it does kind of sound a little bit like you, part of it, because toward the beginning, he starts talking about Melchizedek, and he's like, I want to tell you about Melchizedek, but I can't say more than what I've just said because you guys aren't ready for it. And then he comes back later, and he's like, fine, I'm going to tell you all about Melchizedek. He goes on. Oh, man. But, all right, I think this is a good episode.
I think
I'm feeling it.
Episode.
Yeah, we're over an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, the last one.
Okay.
Or should we just end there?
No, let's do last one.
How important, Dr. Pritchett, is sex in marriage?
Okay.
Says Randy. No, that wasn't Randy. I don't know who asked this, but they want to know. The people want to know what you think, or maybe what I think. And how does this affect people who are physically unable to engage in such activities?
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
That's a pastoral care counseling question.
Yeah.
That we should send to Chatham.
We don't need Chatham for this. I can handle this one.
Here's what I think. All in a normal marriage where people are capable of it, I think it's important. But I think it's only as important as the importance you place on it. If you don't place that much importance on it in your marriage, and as people get older, that kind of slows down anyway. So it's as important as you can place on it, but I think you have to have a special category for people who are unable to perform those functions due to whatever. There's a whole variety of reasons, whatever they are. I don't want to get into it, but reasons, right? So that people can't do it. I still believe that you can have a lifelong, fulfilling marriage without sex.
Yeah.
Have I had a day that I found was fulfilling without sex in my marriage? Yes. Now, have one of those every day, and you might be. I think there would be struggles there if, like, you want to but can't express it that way. But as far as how important it is, it's to the level of importance you place on it. That would be my answer. And if you're unable to do it, I still believe that you can have a very fulfilling. And I don't know if we're talking about like any sort of physical interaction or intimacy, but you can still have intimacy without sex.
Yes.
So,
well, I think, and don't only listen to part of this explanation, but listen to the whole thing. I think sex has a couple of purposes. One is intimacy. We do know that there are God-given chemicals that are released, just like when a woman is breastfeeding with a baby to cause bonding with the baby. There are chemicals that are released during sex that will make a feeling of bonded. I'm closer to this person now. So that is a real thing, and I can only imagine that is there partly because God wants people to have companionship and love and be as close as they can possibly be, two human beings can possibly be to serve, partly also to serve as an image of the church and
it's also
as the bride.
Procreation.
But the principal reason, now this is what I was going to say, I think probably the principal reason that sex isn't, just what do the organs do? What is this for? Procreation. Even when there's not a helper suitable for him, why was there not a helper suitable for him? Well, one thing, because there wasn't another human being. But another reason is all these animals could procreate together. He needed someone that he could procreate together with.
To fulfill the divine.
And so that is an important function of it. So is it important in marriage? Yes, because it is the means by which God intends procreation to take place. Now, but it does have this other component. And that other component is the intimacy. And I agree 100% with what you just said. If two people, for whatever reason, can't procreate and can't even functionally do what would be necessary to procreate, they can still have intimacy. They can still have a fulfilling relationship. They can even have that kind of closeness. I think you can do that without sex.
And I think that's as a testimony to them. It's kind of like the people who actually can have sex but choose a life of singleness and celibacy. Respect, So I think we talked a lot about sex in Florida for some reason. We kept getting sex questions and marriage questions and stuff. It's like always punting to Leighton because he's the most pastoral out of us. But to me, our culture is sex obsessed. I will share, you can cut this later, but there are days where you and I have both admitted that, could we live without it? Yeah. Do we want to? Not necessarily. But
I don't need to cut that out. That's fine. Yeah, I mean,
we've had these kind of. Could you go without you and your okay? So your wife dies, for example, or so, can you go without it, or do you need to be remarried within 6 months to a year?
And you guys should know, I typically do not like to make comment on things like this, but I do, since I'm being sassy today. I don't know what's gotten into me, but I think as you, like I said that one time, I said something about, there are sometimes you'd rather not, there's sometimes you'd rather do something else that's not, and when you say things like that, play a video game or something or watch whatever, but you say that and you instantly sound horrible and unromantic, and even Billy Wendelin was like, that's just sad. This is a long time ago, Billy, you may not remember, but he's like, that's just sad, and I was like, well, okay, I mean, whatever, I don't know why. I mean, I love my wife. I enjoy our relationship, but you're right. I'm not obsessed. Now, if you're married, have all you want. It's fine. It's fine. Have all you want. But
I'm a fan. There's no doubt about it that I'm a fan. But I mean, is it an absolute necessity? No.
No. In fact, I think for people that people that are experiencing same-sex attraction. And for those people who have decided that they can't do that and be a biblically faithful Christian, if God does not supernaturally remove those desires, they can have close friendships. They could even have a marriage. James White has said this. I don't know if you guys know, James White is a brilliant, biblically knowledgeable theologian.
Because he's not useful in Islam anymore, there's no reason to listen to him at all.
But don't get off on James White. Let me say this. He said this before too, and I've been saying it before he was, and I think it's right, which is two people of the opposite sex who both experience same-sex attraction, theoretically, if they want to be faithful Christians, they could marry each other for a friendship and have a degree of intimacy. It couldn't just be anybody, but they could have a degree of intimacy without sex.
Right.
And have that companionship.
I've heard that said a lot of times.
Well, good.
From a lot of people.
Well, James White probably came up with that because he's so smart.
No. He's smart. Just not right.
He's right about this.
Yeah, but it's because he heard it from someone else.
Old episodes of Trinity Radio, surely. It could be. Okay.
I hope not. Because if that's true, then he knows who I am, and he said he'd never heard of this gentleman before.
Well, that would make him a liar.
Right.
But I don't believe he's a liar.
I don't either. I don't think most people haven't heard of him. So.
But they will.
We're trying.
Now, this is the ceremonial part of the show where I repent.
Oh, for being sassy.
For being a jerk to you.
You weren't a jerk to me. You're just being a jerk. You were an all-around jerk.
It's new to me. I don't understand.
I'm impervious to this stuff. It's like in Florida where you're trying to tell Chip. It's like when he was like asking if y'all got in the debate, who would win? And I jump in there. Well, of course me.
Yeah.
And then he looks at you like, see.
And I was sitting there eating my salad. Oh. I live with this. It doesn't bother me.
He's so used to me being sassy. So, but no, it's fine.
Is it Chris Fisher?
Yeah.
That did the episode about Trinity Radio?
Yeah.
Enjoyed that episode.
Yeah.
We shared with him our disagreements about what he said. Then he went over to my Genesis series and was interacting with me about Mosaic authorship, and that was very interesting. But he apologized. He's like, well, he didn't apologize, but he's like, and if I'm coming across as antagonistic, don't think that, And I was like, I work with Jonathan Pritchett. I said, I don't even mind you being snarky as long as you're kind. That's all I care about. But thank you, Chris Fisher, for paying attention to us and doing an episode about us. We thought it was pretty cool that somebody did that.
Yeah, I've long time. He's my favorite open theist. Long time fan. Well, long time. Few months now. When he uploaded the critique of Zacariotti's opening statement, I thought it was hilarious, and I've been watching his stuff ever since. He's an interesting guy because of his views. I think he walks this line of being really conservative and fundamentalist, except also taking most of the findings of higher forms of biblical criticism. So this is kind of an interesting mix. Because I think if you ask him, he's like a young Earth creationist guy.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I think he's pretty diehard fundamentalist, and yet also takes on most of the conclusions of critical higher.
I can see those. Well, I can see the open theism going together with that, going together with like a person who has those other views.
And he picks on other open theists
because they're trying to be like, no, what does it say?
Yeah,
I'm taking it for what it says, kind of thing.
And he disagrees with like the more philosophical open theists like Greg Boyd. So it's really interesting listening to him. And anyway, he sent us a video. It's basically his why I'm an open theist. So we get to.
He sent us a video.
Yeah, I asked him. So what's your for our Wyman series, because
so we're going to do a why I'm an open theist and do him.
We'll use him. Yeah.
Excellent. Welcome to our world, Chris.
Yeah.
He's got a pretty successful
Reality
YouTube
is not
channel.
optional as this podcast, but it's the podcast you should watch after you've paid attention to Trinity Radio, The Narrow Path, Soteriology 101, and The Bible Brodown, which are all our sister podcasts, and the Trinity Commission, which you should watch first, and then other people like Chris Fisher's stuff, and definitely check out the Synergist podcast with Nick Quint and his buddy. They're good too, but mainly the Trinity Commission.
Become a student of Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary at Trinitysem.edu today. If you think you ever will be a student or interested, go ahead and fill out the eval form. It's just a little bit of information. Doesn't cost you anything. On the right-hand side of the page at Trinitysem.edu, there's a nice little video of me with a suit and tie on. I've got a tie on. Go check it out. Also,
it's not a V-neck. You actually have a button-up shirt and a tie.
There was a V-neck involved. You just couldn't see it. And then we also want to say patreon.com/Trinity Radio if you'd like to be our supporter, or click up here somewhere. And please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please leave us positive comments on the iTunes page for the podcast. But if you don't do anything else, subscribe to the YouTube channel, because that really helps us. It doesn't cost you anything. And I'm telling you, I was thinking about this with some of my other podcasts that I used to listen to that were not that big yet, but that I liked, like Don Johnson's show. If he, I'd be like, well, other people will do that. And he wouldn't even know if I did go do that. So what it doesn't really matter. And then I realized now on this side of it, no, like Don Johnson would have noticed, and it would have mattered to him, and it does matter to us, and so please do that.
Do what? I forgot what you were talking about.
Subscribe to
subscribe to yes, do that. All right, thanks for watching. We're done.
If you would like more content, click here and keep watching Bible studies. Click up here. And finally, we want you to subscribe. We need more subscribers, so click here.